Okay, so for this installment, I'm going to do something a little bit different. In the first part of this series, I hadn't really established the current format, so I covered more lost films in much less time, and since I made that video, I have found a lot more sources. For that reason, I want to revisit those lost films from part 1, which will no longer be part 1 starting now. Instead, because they were my personal picks for lost films I want to see, I changed the title to fit that. I won't cover all those lost films in one video though, I'll include one of them in each new part. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's get into it. First up is one of the films I briefly talked about a while ago when I made my first video on lost films, and it's a big one, Flaming Youth from 1923, which is at the top of my personal list. The reason is because it contributed significantly to the flapper craze that the 1920s is now known for. Flappers had existed before the movie, and we can see very clear evidence of this in F. Scott Fitzgerald's early stories, as well as in the 1920 movie The Flapper. But Flaming Youth, both the movie and the original book from the same year, were instrumental in pushing the idea of flappers firmly into the mainstream. The content matter in the novel was so potentially problematic that the author was published under a pen name so that his reputation wouldn't be tarnished. Another reason why I want to see Flaming Youth so badly is because it starred Colleen Moore, who was the first actress to really make a career out of flapper roles. But the sad truth is that many of her flapper films are lost, which means that they will definitely come up in future videos in this series. Moore's career up to that point had been mostly standard drama roles, and she had some modest success with that, but she probably would have faded into obscurity if she had never become a screen flapper. There is some surviving footage from Flaming Youth. I think it's only one reel or something like that. Okay, so what was the story? Like Treasure Island in the last installment, I've never read the original book, so I will go strictly off information about the movie. I stitched together a few different plot summaries into one that is more detailed than any of them on their own, so here it goes. Mrs. Fentress, because of her husband's neglect, plunges in for a round of gaiety and jazz, and two of her daughters, following suit, contract unhappy marriages. She seeks, however, to be more of a real old-fashioned mother to her youngest daughter, Patricia. Patricia Fentress grows up as the daughter of a mother who turned her home into a neighborhood, and with a father who found his pleasure wherever he could, and she steps into the world of jazz with only her own natural emotions to guide her. Pat, as she is called, tries whatever she sees other girls doing, including cuddling into the arms of every man she meets. Being stricken with heart trouble from overexcitement, Mrs. Fentress dies after telling her friend, Dr. Bobbs, about Carrie Scott, the one man she really loves, and making Bobbs promise to write her regularly about Pat, placing the letters in a wall safe. Previous to her death of heart failure, Mrs. Fentress called Pat to her and told her the combination of the wall safe. Through these letters, she learns how her acts are regarded by another. Carrie Scott calls to see Mrs. Fentress, not knowing that she has died, and he becomes the one stabilizing influence in Pat's life. After a while, they learn to love each other, but Carrie cannot marry her until he gets a divorce from his wife, from whom he is estranged. Pat, disillusioned because of the unhappy marriages around her, hesitates to marry. She seeks solace in the company of a violinist who proves to be a cad. Her better self asserts itself. She jumps into the river. A sailor rescues her. After that terrifying experience, she comes home ill and near death. Carrie returns and he and the doctor try to revive her. Finally, it seems as if the influence of her dead mother's spirit has helped her and spoken through her, for she recovers and finds happiness in marriage with Scott. I think most people can imagine the aspects of the movie that were considered edgy for the time. Even in the early 1920s, jazz was associated with immorality for a lot of people, and a young woman being shown willingly cuddling into the arms of every man she meets and going to petting parties was downright scandalous. The makers of this movie knew what they were getting into, and they doubled down. One of the most memorable scenes that was often mentioned in reviews was when at a pool party, all of the guests get at least partly undressed and jump into the pool. This scene didn't get censored because it was cleverly shot in silhouette, so nothing could actually be seen. But Flaming Youth didn't completely escape censorship. The movie was banned in its entirety in Canada, despite the fact that it had been passed by a board of censors and had previously been shown in Montreal without any problems. The Empire Theatre in Quebec showed the movie before this ban occurred, and the owner was actually arrested for showing it when the movie was suddenly banned shortly afterward, and the lobby cards and movie stills in the theater were confiscated, as well as the film reel itself. And although it wasn't censored in the US, that didn't prevent people from getting very, very upset. A writer in Picture Play magazine was not happy, and went on a long, angry diatribe, and here it is. Flaming Youth was produced without regard to law, order, decency, or restraint. Most of the time, it verges on low comedy and burlesque. Honestly, there are moments when you suspect that Warner Fabian was kidding the world when he wrote the novel, and the director must have been kidding Warner Fabian when he transplanted the novel on the screen. The picture should have been dedicated to Saint Vitus. Not only is the cast afflicted with the fidgets, but the story itself wiggles through all sorts of modern immoralities. But the wiggling is so carefully planned for the censors that Flaming Youth will probably be admitted where Anna Christie is banned. Sometimes I wonder what actors and actresses have against society people. Most actors and actresses I know are capable of acting like ladies and gentlemen, at least when the occasion demands. And most of them have pleasant and agreeable manners. But put them on a set and tell them they are going to be society folks, and bluey, they start giving imitations of the annual dance of the Waiters Club. Colleen Moore plays the Fabian Flapper for low comedy. Even her makeup was intended to be funny, because she manages to look like Gail Henry in a too-real burlesque. But she knows her comedy stuff, and she knows how to be pathetic. And so, as the saying goes, she gets away with the part. And while not having any real power, a meeting of women's club leaders in Madison, Wisconsin declared the movie a menace to public morals. And I couldn't find a review of Flaming Youth in Variety, which I guess makes sense. From what I've seen, it was often a very conservative publication then, so it wouldn't be surprising if it just refused to publish a review of it. But it did publish a couple of articles on the Canada ban. For others, the film was one of the most exciting things on the screen in years. Motion Picture News wrote, "If ever there was a film play that was in style, this is it. They're all crying for entertainment like this. Lots of pep, moments that border on the gasping point, jazz, a snappy story, pretty women, dashing heroes, gorgeous settings, and for good measure, a thrill ever and anon. Flaming Youth is a distinctly high-class, entertaining picture, and will send away everyone who sees it thoroughly satisfied, and will start the gray matter working in heads of many to whom the story will strike home with much force." Exhibitor's trade review heaped on slightly poetic praise. Perhaps college professors will call it trashy, but the people who should be pleased, those who pack the movie houses every night. They are going to go crazy about it, because it flames with youth, it burns with love, and it scintillates with interest. It is like a drink of champagne. It opens up a new sparkling world, alive with beautiful women, handsome men, and homes so luxurious that they are like palaces. It was a movie tailor-made for young adults, with an atmosphere and pace that matched the breakneck speed of the younger set. It was described by the Times Square Daily as a picture that was snappy, fast, and full of sexy stuff. Stripping away the moral crisis bias from a number of reviews, one common objective criticism was that the film could have used some cutting. The magazine Screen Opinions, which claimed that it provided unbiased reviews, said of the length of the movie, It is considerably too long, and will be improved when a few hundred feet are eliminated from the latter half, including some of the kissing scenes. There was also a bit of a debate over whether young jazzy people were portrayed accurately or in a more sensationalistic way. With any Hollywood movie, especially from that time, it's pretty likely that there was some degree of exaggeration. Some reviewers, though they were in the minority, thought that the movie wasn't edgy enough. Despite the cries about a moral panic, the New York Sun wrote that, "The story isn't half as hot as it sounds." Motion Picture News wrote something similar. It said, "A lot of folks will expect to see some sensational scenes similar to those described in the book, but they'll be disappointed." Seeing comments like that kinda makes me want to read the book. And as some of you may have noticed earlier in the video, the main buzzword for Flaming Youth was jazz. It comes up again and again in reviews. This might sound like a weird way to describe a silent film, but jazz was not just a genre of music. It was a philosophy for life, in the same way that Dada was more than just an art style. Jazz was fast, carefree, and left plenty of room for improvisation. And that's exactly how an increasing number of young people wanted to live their lives. Many of the people who liked the movie advised that it wasn't just senseless sin, there was a positive message within. Exhibitor's Trade Review put it nicely when it said that, "The lesson is administered in a sugar-coated pill of laughter, gaiety, and jazz." But to see this message, many reviewers thought, you had to set aside your bias. Maybe some people wouldn't have liked how the message was conveyed, but agreed with it in general. Going back to the plot, Pat enjoyed doing petting and cuddling, but when there was an opportunity to give herself completely to that violinist on the yacht, she resolutely would not, and wouldn't allow her virtue to be taken from her unwillingly, and she chose instead to literally jump ship. The overall message of the movie was a bit of a compromise between the conservative and progressive elements in society. Pat was able to enjoy herself by pushing through some of the older boundaries, but ultimately she chose to save herself for marriage. Though plenty of stubborn people didn't want to accept a compromise. Industry people knew Flaming Youth would probably be a box office smash, and would do so effortlessly. The movie targeted a very enthusiastic demographic. It featured tantalizing things for curious men and women, and could capitalize on the popularity of the book, which had only been published earlier that same year, so the timing was still very up to date, and had been made even before the fast-moving jazzy youth moved on to the next big thing. The Film Daily, speaking to movie exhibitors, said, "Count on your flapper delegation to advertise the showing for you. They'll whisper about the book being naughty, it will be passed around, and there will be a mob on hand." And Exhibitor's Trade Review advised using reverse psychology. It told exhibitors, "The best way to arouse the interest of the curious is to condemn the picture. There is here a peculiar psychology which makes people impatient to see what they have been told not to. Here is your cue for exploitation. Get out letters warning the people that the picture is rife with bold situations and unrestrained necking parties, and advise them not to see and forbid their children to do likewise. They will come hot-footing it to your theater. Inflame the minister with the outrages against society on the part of the younger generation, and get him to preach a sermon on the subject, using the picture to illustrate his point." As I said at the beginning, Flaming Youth did a lot to put the flapper revolution into high gear, and flapper rolls became the new thing in Hollywood. Photoplay magazine joked about the popularity of Flaming Youth, and how it almost immediately spawned a wave of copycats. First, Flaming Youth. It was a hit. So along comes its poor relatives, Flaming Barriers and Flaming Passion. That last is a hot one. They'll need non-flammable film. We'll probably see Flaming Souls and Flaming Sin next, and then the idiot film company will offer a prize for the best title containing the word flaming. That ought to burn it up. For many, another major highlight of the movie, aside from the general feel, was Colleen Moore. She completely stole the show as the main flapper protagonist. Motion Picture News wrote that, It is a difficult thing in commenting on this picture to keep from waxing overenthusiastic on the work of Colleen Moore, who as Patricia Fentress eclipses all her former characterizations and paints a portrait of that modern institution, the flapper, that is without parallel in screen history. We doff our hat to Miss Moore and feel sure that the nation's picture fans will soon be discussing nothing else but her chef-d'oeuvre. Exhibitor's Trade Review made an accurate prediction when it said, "Colleen Moore will without doubt become one of the leading stars of the day as a result of this picture. She is vivacious, light-hearted, gay. She is the young flapper to the very tip of her bobbed head." The reviewer for the New York Tribune wasn't a big fan of the movie itself, but was very enthusiastic about Moore. They wrote, "There is just one thing in this picture that flames. This is Colleen Moore. We have become a complete convert, and realize now that Miss Moore is one of the actively fascinating young women on the screen." The New York American had a similar opinion about the movie in general and Moore. It said, "This little lady was so adorable, so picturesque, so cutely pantomimic, so multicolored in her emotions, and so splendidly eyed that she was quite enough to make a go even of a devitalized book picture." It's not an exaggeration to say that Flaming Youth made Colleen Moore's career skyrocket, and she quickly became an extremely relevant pop culture figure, and one of the most famous actresses in Hollywood in the 1920s. So, the overall quality of the movie is a bit tricky to judge because there were so many biased opinions, both for and against it. But the impression I get is that the movie, objectively speaking, was fairly average, or maybe a little bit above average. But depending on what you wanted from movies, it could prove very exciting and titillating. It was most definitely hip and cool for the younger crowd, and Colleen Moore made up significantly for any of the movie's flaws with her glowing breakthrough performance. In retrospect, Flaming Youth definitely gets an A+ for cultural influence. And you might say that, more than any other movie of the decade, it best captured the zeitgeist of a generation. Even perhaps the leading authority of the Jazz Age, F. Scott Fitzgerald, recognized this when he said, "I was the spark that lit up Flaming Youth, and Colleen Moore was the torch." Next, let's go to a different actress who did flapper roles, and another favorite of the channel, Louise Brooks, again. For Louise Brooks fans, 1927 is almost a completely lost year in her filmography. Out of the 4 movies she made that year, only a 23-minute fragment survives from one of them, and her movie Rolled Stockings is not that movie. Like quite a few lost films, if you look it up online, you won't find very much about it at all. And that's a big reason why I started this series in the first place, so I hope I can remove some of the dust that obscures it from the general public. And I found out very quickly that there are a shocking amount of Louise Brooks fans out there, so this one's for you. I also wanted to talk about it because it was a college picture. I've mentioned this before, but I love all the trendy college stuff of the 1920s. It's usually carefree, fun, and very connected to the rapidly changing culture of 1920s America. And there was a mini trend of college-related movies for a little while around 1925, 1926, and 1927, propelled by such popular movies as The Freshman, so Rolled Stockings was part of that little wave. Okay, so what was the story of Rolled Stockings? It's the story of 2 brothers, Jim Treadway, the older brother, and Ralph Treadway, the younger brother. Their father is disappointed when Jim doesn't make the college rowing team, which is a tradition for Treadway men, so his hopes are pinned on Ralph, and Ralph does in fact make the team. Amidst all of this, the 2 brothers fall in love with the same girl, Carol Fleming. On the eve of a big boat race, Ralph finds out that Jim has won Carol when he sees him kiss her, and he abandons the race to drown his sorrows at a seedy roadhouse. Ralph's father and the rowing coach search all over for him, but Jim finds Ralph first and warns him, because if he is caught there by the coach, he will be expelled from the college, and would also greatly upset their father. After a struggle, Ralph escapes just in the nick of time, though Jim is discovered at the roadhouse and takes the blame and is expelled. Ralph then competes in the boat race, which serves as the climax of the movie. I couldn't find much information about the exact details of the ending, but one review described it as a brief and rather obvious twist to a happy ending, so my guess is that Ralph's team won the race one way or another. Perhaps the most controversial thing about this movie was the title, and you might be wondering why, since it seems normal enough. Well, rolled stockings were associated with flappers or flapper-adjacent young women, which in Hollywood were often depicted in risque ways, and there was none of that to be seen in this movie. It's a small thing, but it was a fact that was often mentioned in reviews about it. I guess some people felt misled, or that it was a cheap, though ultimately harmless lie. And as the New York Times review noted, incidentally, the only rolled stockings in the film appear in a subtitle. Another publication, the film Spectator, was less forgiving. It wrote, "One of the mysteries of rolled stockings is its title. Pickled pig's feet would have been just as appropriate." Louise Brooks would have been the perfect actress for showing off skimpy clothing or risque close-ups of legs, but as the exhibitor's herald noted, not even Louise Brooks got a close-up lower than the neckline. Despite some unfulfilled promises, most of the reviews were still mildly positive, though not raving. Rolled Stockings wasn't intended to be a hugely profitable movie. Paramount used their junior stars, which were some of the younger, less popular but still somewhat known actors. It was obviously just light fare intended for the younger crowd, and because there wasn't anything actually scandalous in it, some reviewers mentioned that it was good for families. What many appreciated was the college atmosphere, and that would probably be one of the biggest reasons people would want to watch it now if it still existed. Among the aspects of college life featured were sports, parties, pranks, and a fraternity initiation. Variety wrote positively, "An exceptional picture of college life is here presented. For once, the motif of college athletics has been handled as a background rather than the center of interest. The screen story is a vast improvement upon the labored idea of a college sporting event upon which hangs the outcome of a romantic situation, such as the long run of the football hero that lifted disgrace from the halfback. The campus atmosphere is splendidly done in a vein of high comedy rather than the familiar rah-rah travesty. These young people are real, in settings recognizable in life. College pictures usually have the tone and mood of a Mack Sennett riot." The movie magazine Screenland went so far as to say that Rolled Stockings was the best college story that's ever been filmed, whereas the New York Herald Tribune wrote that, "The most that one can say for Rolled Stockings is that it is innocuous." A few reviews, though somewhat positive, thought that the climactic boat race at the end was rather disappointing, and the ending was implied to be generic a few times. Most of the complaints about the movie were minor ones, which gives me the impression that it was very run-of-the-mill, with not many glaring flaws, but not much especially memorable either. As I said before, the slightly positive or lukewarm reviews made up the vast majority that I found, but there was one especially negative review from the film Spectator. I quoted the very beginning of it before, and now I'll read through the rest of it, and that will include some arguably very picky criticisms. Despite the review going against the grain at times, it covers a lot about the movie, and gives us a good idea of specific details and scenes, so I'll include a much longer excerpt than I normally would for that reason. Just know that, while it's useful, it didn't necessarily represent the majority of opinions. So this one is for all you super 1920s movie nerds out there. Okay, here it goes. The story is ridiculous, and the picture gives the impression that the director and the cast knew it was, and worked with the single aim of getting through with it. The main weakness of Richard Rawson's direction was his disposition to line up his characters facing the camera. This is a habit that a great many directors have, apparently because someone started doing it a long time ago. No scene can be more natural than the grouping of the characters in it. In the final fade-out, David Torrance, Louise Brooks, James Hall, and Richard Arlen have a get-together session at a railway station. They stand in a straight line facing the camera, an utterly absurd way of presenting them. And even if it were permissible on the ground of naturalness, it is not as effective as if the three young people had faced the father, allowing the camera to register the action by showing their backs. Rolled Stockings has a close-up debauch to its discredit, although Bud Lighton's indulgence in this editorial weakness is not quite as wild as Lloyd Sheldon's in The Whirlwind of Youth. If the simple rule of applying reason to the use of close-ups were adopted in motion picture studios, we would have more pictures displaying intellectual treatment. The opening sequence in Rolled Stockings shows the home of the two boys about to leave for college. Their father and mother are in the scenes with them. It is shown almost entirely in close-ups, thus getting away entirely from the spirit of the sequence. A family is an entity, and when one is shown on the screen solely to establish the family idea, the illusion is weakened by close-ups, which show the different characters as individuals, instead of as parts of something that an effort is being made to present as a whole. The group idea should not be destroyed. Some of the close-ups containing the heads of two people add a humorous touch to this picture. In order to get them within the frame and retain the huge proportions of the heads, the characters have to stand so close together that their noses almost touch while they talk. Such ridiculous scenes are things that make movies out of what might have been motion pictures. If you have not seen this picture, you will realize to what extreme the close-up evil is carried when I tell you that, at times, even Louise Brooks's legs are cut in order to give the audience stupendous views of her features. Although it is a college picture, there is no real college atmosphere in it. A long initiation sequence is utterly devoid of either entertainment or humor. In a boat race sequence, yell leaders do their daily dozens in front of groups of elderly people who make no response whatever. Dick Arlen, stroke of his crew, a manly chap who takes to drink on the eve of his race because Louise is going to marry his brother, wears a heavy sweater while rowing in the race. This is the only new thing in the picture, the only thing that never was done before on the screen or in a boat race. Paramount must be hard up for stories when it has to fall back on one which builds its main situation on the fact that the stroke of a crew on the eve of a great race throws down his college by breaking training. It is unheard of. But anyway, the titles in Rolled Stockings are punctuated properly. It is the only thing to the picture's credit. There is not one single good performance in it. And that just about does it for this video. I know I usually do 3 lost films per installment, but there was a lot about Flaming Youth that I wanted to talk about, and then that last excerpt for Rolled Stockings was really long, so after only 2 films, I was already at about the normal runtime, so I hope it didn't get too stale. And as I said in the beginning, I'll be going over the films from the first video in this series in a lot more detail, so look out for that in the future. Well, anyway, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.